So we're going to talk about and kind of flesh out something that is very important for us to recognize. See, I think we live in a time where people want to create their own truth, right? We kind of go through like there's not some certain ironclad laws of the universe, right? And the reason that there are some ironclad laws of the universe is because God created the universe and he created it in an orderly fashion. And there are some things that no matter how much you wish it didn't exist or how carefully planned that you try to avoid, you are going to experience the reality of God's creation, right? And one of those things is that for every action, for everything that you do, there will be consequences, right? Now, you may say, well, yeah, sure. But do we really think about that? That everything you do impacts, has consequences, either positive or negative. That there are consequences for your actions, right? And it doesn't matter, positive, negative, good, bad. And sometimes we want to live life as if that's not the case. We just want to live the way that we want to live, right? Without any of the consequences. And especially whenever those consequences are negative, there's many times we like, I still want to live that way, but I don't want those negative consequences. So now I'm going to find a way to change that. I'm going to work to try to change that. And you may be able to do that for a while, but eventually the consequences always catch up. Right? I think one of the easiest examples of this is what we've done with our view of sexuality. Right? There's consequences. You engage in sexual activity, there are consequences, right? That will happen. Possible pregnancy, right? There's emotional bonds that's hard to really flesh out and to understand, but you know that it's true. You can deny it as long as you want, but you know that it's true, right? So, but as a society, what we started doing is like, well, we like the pleasure aspect of this, but we don't necessarily want those consequences. So let's try to change those consequences, right? So birth control, all of these things, and which is not bad in itself, right? It's just like, oh, but we can avoid the consequences. But then, no, it's not always. We have one, right? Right? Those pills are not 100%, right? There are consequences, right? This is such a wonderful privilege of being able to do that to your children. It is. It really is. That is, yeah. Now there will be consequences for me for doing this, but but we understand those consequences still happen, right? And then all of a sudden we say, well, why not abortion? That we can eliminate the consequences, right? But you can't. The consequences are always there. Okay. And we need to understand that reality. And of course, there are consequences for our sinfulness, for our choosing to go our own way. I want to read two passages, both in Genesis. The first one is Genesis chapter 3. It says, now the serpent was more crafty than any other of the beasts of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And then we know, of course, what happens, right? And there are consequences, right? And that I think it's really important for us to kind of to understand that temptation, right? A lot of times we think of temptation in specific ways, like, oh, I'm tempted to drink too much, I'm tempted to sleep around, I'm tempted to gossip, and we connect it with a specific sin. Yeah, that's true, but the bigger theological point, the thing that we really need to make sure we understand is the temptation that the serpent is giving to Eve is the temptation that we all face on a daily basis. It starts off with, did God really say? Just that little question, that questioning of God. And because there's things that we read in Scripture about God and about the character of God, and some of these truths, like there are consequences to all your answers, to all your actions, right? And there's part of us that, well, did God really mean that? Did God really say that? See, that's starting to open the door, and again, God is open for you to question. We've talked about our relationship with Him is to wrestle with God, right? So it's not bad to think about things and to ask questions. But when we do that, recognize you're opening a door, and Satan is going to use that to try to pull you away from God, right? And it's interesting what the serpent says. So he says, did God actually say that you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? Well, that's not really what God said, but it's close, right? So it gets Eve, and by the way, I would love to pin all this on Eve. I really would. But Adam was right there. Like, well, he just was too much of a pansy to speak up, right? Like, I mean, really, if he would have been doing his job, he would have said, honey, we need to move on, right? But he didn't. So he's just as equally at fault, all right? So what they should have done right at that moment is they should have walked away. But all of a sudden, what did that question do? That question got them focusing on what they weren't supposed to have, rather than on the rest of the whole garden that God had given them free reign of. Right? All of a sudden, oh, man, if I just had that, then my life would really be complete. Right? That's all of a sudden that thought process starts rolling, and you can see it. And so then Eve responds and says, no, we're not supposed to eat of just this one, and we're not supposed to touch it lest you die. And then the serpent said, you will not surely die. Now, what's interesting is both of them are right. God knew that if they ate from that tree, that sin would enter in, and then the consequences of that would be that they would die. But they weren't going to die right away. So the serpent was right as well. You see how manipulative sin can be? The serpent says, oh, you'll not surely die, right? Because he's talking about the immediate, right then. And so the serpent's actually right. And then he says, for God knows, but the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That is the root of all temptation, is our desire to be like God, right? It is vital that we understand that God is God and we are not, right? And so much of our sinfulness and our rebellion comes from this desire for us to be God in our own life, right? And that can look at many different ways. Sometimes it looks and where you just completely turn your back on God, right? That says there is no God, and I'm going to live my life that way. I'm going to be my own God, essentially, right? Which that is the world's view of things, right? But our view is that no, God is God, and we don't take that place, and we need to acknowledge that, right? We need to be careful with how we order our lives. What is the most important thing in our life? What influences you the most? It needs to be God, because if it's not, it's going to lead to temptations. It's going to lead to doors being open that's going to move you further away from God, right? And we live in a world that is all about creating idols, right? And by the way, idols, a lot of times we think that that's, a little fat guy or something like that. That's a little idol. That's those are idols, and I would recommend not worshiping them, right? But the idols that truly do the most damage are idols that in themselves are not all that dangerous. In fact, may be good. But if we give them more authority than they should have, they become dangerous. An easy example is, and this is for guys especially, I know this can happen. I've struggled with this a little bit, is with the sports world. That sports becomes an idol. Look at what's happened, and I can remember when Sports Center started coming around, right? And then all of a sudden you have all these sports talk shows, and now you have numerous guys all day. They're listening on the radio and stuff like that. It's all it is sports, right? Now there's nothing wrong with sports. I love sports, and I enjoy watching a game, but we have way too many guys who know everything about their favorite team, who have no idea what's going on in the world that actually matters. We have a lot of guys that won't miss a single football game and watch football all weekend, but won't take their kids out to the park, right? That's when you know that something has become an idol. And by doing that, what have you done? You've kind of put yourself in God's place. No, I know what's best for me, right? So we have to be careful with that. We have to make sure that God is God and we are not. Because when we get that out of order, there are consequences. Adam and Eve experienced those consequences. They had to go leave the garden, right? Life became more difficult for them. God does not abandon them. In fact, God starts finding ways to redeem them because he wants to bring them back into that relationship that he created them to be in, but it wouldn't be the same because all actions have consequences.
Sure.
So that's looking at this from an individual kind of position between your relationship with God. You need to make sure that the order is right, that God is God and you are not. There are also consequences to actions of societies as a whole. When societies as a whole move in certain directions and take certain actions, there will be consequences. It doesn't mean that everyone is responsible for those and will be held accountable for those actions, but it is important that we know and that when societies go certain directions, it can lead to good things or it can lead to bad things, right? Genesis chapter 11. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. Now this is a very popular story, right? The Tower of Babel. It's interesting that the tower is only mentioned once. It's actually a city, right? What did they stop building? They stopped building the city. But they were building the city and the tower. And why were they building it? To make their names known, right? There's a lot of similarities between this passage and the Genesis 3 passage, right? Now, one is more on the individual level. This one is on the societal level. But both are deciding, no, we can be God. We don't need to follow God. We can do it ourselves, right? And the tower here, in fact, there are those who think that they know basically where it is and that there's ruins of it, I believe. It wouldn't be like a skyscraper. I remember like in Sunday school as a kid, you talk about the Tower of Babel, and it's like this really tall, tower, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, right? That's way up in the cloud. No, what it was something called like a ziggurat, right? It would have been a huge pagan worship, right? It would have been a tower, a building, yes. There's those who think that it may have been built in a way where there was actually dwellings on it. We don't know for sure, but it was not just a tower. It was a tower built to honor the people and their creation, not honor God, right? They were doing this for a purpose, right? They were worshiping pagan deities, or they were just worshiping themselves, right? Because they forgot what was important, that God is God and we are not, right? And so it's interesting as you kind of read through, and I love how it says the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, right? So it's like, yeah, I have a bad feeling. So something's not going good. I better go check that out, right? And he goes down and it says, now let us go down and confuse their language. There's some fascinating thoughts on this, because we see this also whenever God created in the beginning, and he created man, male and female. It says, let us create man in our image, right? Here's let us do that. Is that referring to the Trinity? Probably, right? It's God and his counsel, the full counsel of God, if you will, right? That God is there. And so he says, let us confuse their language, which is kind of funny, because in that the conversation of the people were, let us build a city and a tower, right? To make a name for ourselves. It's like, oh, we can do this together. And God's like, no, you can't. Right? But one thing that is interesting is God does acknowledge that they can do nearly anything, that they can have great achievements. Right? That's kind of an interesting little part of this passage, that God says, hey, if they keep doing this, that what's to stop them, right? They are going to have great achievement. And what would be the result of that achievement? More and more people would believe that they are God and not God, right? Because all of a sudden, oh, if we can create this city, if we can create this pagan temple, and it brings all this glory upon us and we become the greatest people ever, well, then why did we need that God guy? Look at what we just did, right? And so God, his whole desire is to redeem people, to bring them to him, right? That's what he wants to happen. It's what he's constantly about, is bringing his creation to him. He's like, no, we need to go confuse this, because this is just going to cause more and more people to turn away from me. So God acknowledges that success can happen, that humanity can do some pretty amazing things. But there are consequences to your actions. And eventually, even societies who turn their back on God, who believe that they can be God themselves, eventually they end up dispersed and confused. It happens in different ways, right? But eventually, that iron law does kick in. So I want us to talk a little bit about and apply that. How does the Tower of Babel, how does that have anything to do with the year 2025, February 2nd, right? What's the relevancy here, other than the big picture, right? Well, I think there's definitely relevancy. One, the first passage that we read obviously is relevant to you each and every day. Making sure that you are not choosing to be God, that you made God God. But as we look into our society, what is our society doing? Is our society as a whole trying to acknowledge God, or is our society in general as a whole trying to be their own God? I would say we're clearly moving in the direction that society is trying to be its own God. And we've seen that for a while now, right? And we talk about that a lot. A lot of the things that we're seeing in society as a result, a natural result, when a society chooses to abandon its principles, to abandon the truth of God, these are some of the things that you start seeing. Well, I want us to talk about a specific aspect of what's going on in our culture right now. And not just to talk about it, because there's not going to be a whole lot of answers here. But one thing I believe is so important is that you need people to go and talk about the things that we talk about in here. I want you to be able to go and talk about that with your friends and people who don't go to church, right? We should be able to apply the truths found in Scripture to what's going on in the world around us. Because guess what? This is a relevant book. We don't have to manipulate it to be relevant. It is relevant. And we need to take those truths that we find here into the world around us. And I think too often we've kind of focused on, well, the way that you're a disciple and that you're called to go out is you need just to go out and tell people about Jesus. Tell people that Jesus loves them, right? That they're sinners and they need Jesus. Granted, true, right? But guess what? Most people, they're not going to respond to that if that's the first thing you say to them. I've been meaning to see you, Tom. I've been meaning to talk about this. And you go and on Monday morning you say, Tom, you're a sinner. You need Jesus, right? Tom is probably going to say, dude, it's Monday. I'm tired. Yeah, I'm mad that the Eagles made the Super Bowl, right? I don't want to talk about this, right? We can find other ways to talk about biblical truths. For example, there's a lot of people talking about what's going on culturally. How about we apply biblical truth to that? You don't have to be overt about it. You can just say, my perspective coming from my godly principles and the truth that I find in Him, this is how I view what's going on. Over the last couple weeks, and we've talked a little bit about this before, but over the last couple weeks, this really jumped into the news again. And I thought about the story of the Tower of Babel, because I think it's a very similar story. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's becoming more mainstream of people talking about artificial intelligence and what that is, right? And here's the reality. I'm making an assumption here. No one in this room has any idea what that is. We just know that it's out there and it's something that we can't really wrap our mind around, right? And it's something that's like, well, how is this even relevant? Is it important? Oh, I'm not even going to worry about it. Or we get really scared, or we get, all of these things, and people dismiss it. It's like, oh, I can't understand. There's no way that it could be that powerful, right? Be careful, right? Because there's a lot of things in this world that I cannot explain, and I don't understand how they work, but I can see how powerful they are. For example, I really don't understand how, when I plug something into that it can power a whole, speaker. I really don't fully understand how that works, but man, it works, right? You look at your phone. I have no idea how all that works. That phone has transformed society. So just because we don't fully understand something and we kind of think, oh, that could never happen, doesn't mean that it's not real and making an impact. Okay? So I do want us to talk just for a few minutes about artificial intelligence from a biblical perspective, because a lot of people, and my first response is, oh, that's of this devil. Get it away from me. Get away, devil. No, I don't want it around. I don't want that close to me, right? It can be a terrifying thing, right? But guess what? The artificial intelligence cat is out of the bag. It's happening. And it's going to continue to grow. And here's the basic theory. Where we are right now is artificial intelligence is like Siri. It's like Chat GPT. That's basically doing one thing, but it does it in amazing ways, right? You can ask it a question. It analyzes language. It is able to go through all of the internet and gather language, and then it's able to respond appropriately to you. Now, that's like, whoa, but really that's one thing. It has that one task. Does that make sense? Right? And it's getting much better, right? And in fact, if you paid attention to the stock market, the NASDAQ took a nosedive. It was either last Monday or the Monday before. And the reason that it did is because China unleashed its own app that's like a Chat GPT app called DeepSeek. And it was just as good as the Chat GPT stuff, okay? And so people kind of freaked out. They're like, we thought China was, a little bit further behind. But no, they're kind of right here. We are in an arms race. I don't want... In World War II, there was a lot of things going on that people didn't know about. We didn't know that there was a race going on to develop the nuclear bomb. But it was going on. And you know what? It was going to change the world. I think we're in a similar situation, right? This AI is rapidly growing. So where it is now is it does what I just said. The theories are, and unfortunately these theories appear to be coming true. The next section is artificial general intelligence. That means that's us. That's how we think of things, right? Like I can know a little bit of Spanish. I can also, be able to read a medical journal a little bit. I can learn about construction. I can learn a little bit about a whole bunch of different things, right? Does that make sense? The artificial general intelligence is when computers can do that. However, they can do that really well. Like I just know a little bit of Spanish, un poquito, right? Just a little bit. They can learn all of Spanish. They can learn all of this. They can learn all of this, right? Whoa. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. But then it actually, the theories are that it can actually get to an artificial superintelligence, which basically It can know all of the knowledge that is available to know. It can know, right? Now, you may say, well, so what? What does this mean? And guess what? There's going to be people on both sides of this. That people that are terrified, people that are like, oh, it's no big deal, right? And just this last week, this guy named Steve Adler, he worked for ChatGPT. He was working there in 2022. That's when he started working. That was before that was released, right? And he just resigned. And here's what he said. Now, this guy may be crazy. I don't know. He says, honestly, I'm pretty terrified by the pace of AI development these days. He said, when I think about where I'll raise a future family or how much to save for retirement, I can't help but wonder, will humanity even make it to that point? He says, an AGI or artificial general intelligence race is very risky gamble with huge downside. He says, no lab has a solution to AI alignment, which means ensuring that AI's objectives match those of humans. And the faster we race, the less likely that anyone finds one in time. He says, today it seems like we're stuck in a really bad equilibrium. Even if a lab truly wants to develop AGI responsibly, others can still cut corners to catch up, maybe disastrously. And this pushes all to speed up. I hope labs can be candid about the real safety regulations needed to stop this. Yeah. But it doesn't matter. It's too late. It's moving, right? I mean, we just had the president that he's going to be investing heavily in an AI kind of server farm up in Abilene. Billions of dollars are being invested in this. And guess what? I understand why. It's an arms race now, right? So how do we approach this? One, I think we need to recognize there is clear danger here, right? You can go and you can read, and many of the people who do understand this, they see this as basically creating a godlike being. They will use that terminology, right? They are falling into the same trap in the Tower of Babel, where the people said, let us build a city and a tower to honor ourselves because we want to be like God. And I'm sure there were lots of good reasons too. Like, hey, if we have this city and we bring everyone in, we can make sure everybody has housing. We can make sure everybody has food, all this stuff, right? Okay. Everything has consequences. When you start thinking that you can be God and God is not, eventually consequences come. So the reason I want to even talk about this is I think it's important that you be able to have those conversations with people. Don't be scared. In fact, the more I've gone through a wide range of emotions. I've done a lot of Googling, read tons of articles. This is hitting everywhere. Relevant Magazine is a Christian magazine, had an article about it. Christianity Today, which is possibly not a Christian magazine that no one should ever read, but I did because we shouldn't support them. They're talking about it. Like this is out there now. And one thing is we actually, I went from kind of being terrified to now really excited of what the opportunities are, not of what AI is going to do, but the opportunities we are going to have to bring people to Christ. Because this is going to have worldwide implications. The world is going to change. I believe that we're going to be living in a time where the amount of change is the same as when they went from, the horse and buggy to the airplane, right? Like we're going to see society transform radically. And that naturally gives you a little bit of, oh, great, right? But step back. As long as we put God where he is supposed to be, God will still be God in our lives. We are not, and we will have the strength and the courage to handle whatever may happen. And I think one of the reasons that's important to understand this, was a quote in an article I read. It's really good. It says, if Christians aren't careful, we could find ourselves drawn into a world where truth is measured by how confidently it's presented rather than whether it aligns with God's reality. So what does that mean with AI? I believe we're going to see some amazing, wonderful advancements. There's a really good chance that cancer is cured. Who would be against that? No one. We're going to see some amazing things happen with this technology. The potential is there. And all of a sudden, people are going to be starting to celebrate this, right? Right now, you can use AI to help you in your business and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. Understand, we shouldn't be scared of that. But what's going to happen is it gets better and better, and I think it's going to start off because I see everything from a spiritual battle. So how would I want to play this out, right? If I'm Satan. This is going to be really good. It's going to show lots of benefits to the world. And people are like, this is great. Keep going, right? We can solve every problem. We've been in a war on poverty forever. Man, AI can just start coming up with all the answers and it can put all that data and can come together and say, hey, here's how you can do that, right? Here's how you cure cancer. Here's how you can do this. Here's how we can have world peace, right? And people are like, oh, yes. And all of a sudden, all that's doing is drawing people away from God. And we start to be under the delusion that, oh, we can solve all the problems. We can do this. And then there's many ways that it can be negatively used, right? All of a sudden, everyone is under surveillance. You can't go into certain places because it doesn't want you to, right? Like we could go down that road, watch Terminator, right? And that's more than likely not how it's going to happen, by the way, right? But there are definitely negative things that can happen. But I think it will be used to try to pull people away from the reality of God. There will be Christians that start to question whether God is real because they're seeing what we've been able to create, what humans created. These will be the questions that are out there. God has called you to bring the truth to those people who are questioning. So whenever people start freaking out about all this stuff, one, you don't need to do that. God is on your side if you were on his side, right? Hey, we'll make it through this. I don't know what it looks like, but as Christians, we shouldn't be weak, scared people as to what's going on in the world. How does that point people to Christ? No, we should be confidently able to address these issues and say, hey, I don't have all the answers, but I know the one who does, right? And that's where I'm putting my trust. So don't be fearful. Don't treat it as if it's the number 666. It probably is, but don't freak out that way, right? Be confident. Say, no, look at the opportunities that this is going to have. And then as people start to get really excited about it, we need to pull them back and say, yeah, but we're not God. And we need to point people to God. There are going to be things that are happening in the world that are going to give you opportunities to have conversations that you never thought you'd have again. This week, I promise you, you can have a conversation with someone about AI. And you know what? You could just start suddenly bringing in and say, it's really cool. There's some exciting things and some terrifying things, but the one reality is that it doesn't matter how good it is and how good it gets. It's not God. And we need to be careful about that, right? And maybe you could spark a conversation and people say, oh, well, why would you believe that? And it opens up a door. This is a wonderful time to be alive. And it's a terrifying time to be alive because we don't have all the answers, but we have the one true answer that God is God. We are not. Our society, sadly, is trying to create God.
Not right.
There will be consequences. I don't know what they will be. There will be a mixture. Some good, ultimately very bad when you lose that truth. But guess what? God's desire is to bring people into a relationship with him. And whenever chaos starts to mount out there, the opportunity to bring people back to Christ just increases if we will take the opportunity. Don't shrink in fear. Engage the world. Point people to Christ. Point people to the one who is God, where we find truth. It's going to be an exciting few years. It's going to be interesting to see how all that works out, right? But we're part of it. Take advantage of it. God has called you to this time in history for whatever reason. Don't say, well, did God really say? Did God really want me here at this time? What does God really want? No, go out and live your life for him. Point people to him. I don't care how scary AI is. It does not compare to the power and the glory of God. And ultimately, it will never supersede God. Thankfully, we can choose to be on his side and to follow his truth, no matter what's going on in the world around us.